Welcome back to If I Knew You Better. I'm Brendan Davis, your host, and today's guest is Steve HOFFMAN. I'll tell you more about him in just a moment. First, a quick programming note. I'm also cross-posting this show on my other original China-focused podcast, Big Fish in the Middle Kingdom. Steve was actually an early guest on that show with me too, and on that one we talked all about his China business origin story. Steve later joined me and my co-host Ying Li on my second podcast, How China Works. On that show, Steve gets very strategic about how to best navigate China specifically, and he details a lot of tips and tricks about how to do so. And while that show is super granular and market focused, I do also think it's worth a listen in particular, regardless of whether or not you have any China interest. It's very useful. And if nothing else, I think that you'll probably be a lot more China savvy when it's done, depending on your level of engagement with the Middle Kingdom. But part of why I created this show in the first place was to talk to insightful, successful people from around the world, not just those who are in or have some relationship to China. I want to learn about how where they came from and the experience of their journey along the way really makes them tick now, and to hear whatever they can share with me, and by extension you, from their travels that they think is the most helpful. And getting Steve back on the mic for this show has been a priority of mine ever since I originally had the idea. So I'm really glad that he said yes, and I am thrilled with the result. I hope you think so too when we get to that. It actually went so well that we talked for about 15 minutes after the recording stopped, so there might be a round two of this sometime if you're interested. And as I said, I'm cross-posting this on Big Fish in the Middle Kingdom, so you can search that show's archive for his name. He's show number 5 there, or just follow the link in the show notes I'm including here for more information. So, having said all of that, let's get into it. Millions of people in the tech and startup world know Steve HOFFMAN as Captain Hoff from Founderspace. Founderspace is a leading startup incubator from Silicon Valley that is now omnipresent throughout China. That is no exaggeration. His now global company grew out of a simple blog that he created as a freshly successful founder himself to help out his friends who had a bunch of questions. You know, he couldn't have coffee meetings with everybody, so the idea was to create something where there could be a community. Now, the idea was to provide this Q&A space where people could learn and help each other. And in a way, Founderspace is really just that idea writ very, very large. And of course, that's the public narrative about that company, and it's very well known if you know that sector. But very few people actually know that Steve's first career was as a development executive in Hollywood. And this is the first time he's talked about it all in depth since the beginning, his China adventures. From my point of view, the lessons Steve's learned from his success shaping startups and stories are invaluable, and I think they're applicable regardless of your vocation or location. And I especially love his closing thoughts. I'm going to quote him here. He says at the end of the interview, "Are you putting your time into the most important things? Given who you are and where you are in your life, what's the most value you can be creating for the people around you and the world around you? And can you focus your energies on that instead of getting distracted by all these other things?" Now, Steve has a lot more to say as well, but that sums it up pretty nicely. All right, as you can probably tell, I think this was a very fun and special conversation, so I hope you enjoy my talk with Steve HOFFMAN. Well, Steve HOFFMAN, Captain Hoff, welcome to If I Knew You Better.
Yes. Wonderful to be here.
I'm really glad to have you here, and as I just mentioned in the intro, you've been kind enough to be on the other 2 podcasts that I've been part of, so I think if you start a podcast, I really owe you a few favors here, although I don't know if I can help you that much with yours.
Thank you.
So, how do you introduce yourself to people who you'd like to know better?
I always tell everybody I meet, just call me Captain Hoff, and that puts a smile on their face.
Right.
They're like, why do you call yourself Captain Hoff?
Provokes conversation, yeah.
Yeah, and I say, well, I'm the captain of an incubator and accelerator, and I'm like the captain of the team, and the startups are my team, and I lead them forward.
Nice. And where did you first get that nickname?
It was my gamer handle.
Ah, okay.
So, I like these real-time strategy games online, and I picked the name Captain Hoff as my name, and it just evolved from there. And then people started calling me that in social occasions, and it went on and on into the incubator.
Excellent. Well, many people know you. You are no stranger to being interviewed or being seen publicly. So I'm going to try to find a few angles with this talk that are things that are not so much of what people might already know about you. Of course, people know you these days from Founderspace, especially in all your startup history and all the work you're doing in China, which I know we'll get to. But I'd like to ask you to start kind of way back. Where and what do you consider to be your roots?
So my roots are, I grew up in a college town, Davis, California. My father was a professor. My mother was an artist. They both had a profound influence on me. So I grew up really good at math, good at computers, coding at a young age. But I also grew up creating movies, creating games, board games, creating art, all these different projects. I was constantly doing a project. So by the time I graduated high school, I'd made probably 200 different board games.
Wow.
And over 50 different movies, short films.
Jeez. So board games, we'll obviously get to movies because I want to drill down into that. But in terms of board games, I mean, things like Avalon Hill strategy games or...
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I played them all.
I like that you instantly reacted because Avalon Hill, I mean, that's a people.
You have to be a geek to
most
even
of our
know about
audience
that.
has no idea, and you were on it before I finished the word. I heard it in your voice. That's awesome. What were some of the things that really interested you? Like what were the kind of the campaigns or the worlds that you were building your games in?
Well,
I would many, it had to be all over, but
I played a lot of preset or commercial board games. I'd buy them all and try them out with my friends. I played all sorts of role-playing games, but where it really got fun was where I would take the materials for an existing board game and I would create my own.
Okay. So
I created over 30 different ways to play the game of Risk.
Wow.
So
right.
you play Risk, but I spent most of my time playing different versions of Risk that I would just invent. So some of them were like nuclear Risk, where both sides could build nuclear weapons and destroy each other.
Jeez, awesome.
Others,
I mean, scary, but awesomely inventive.
Others where you could tax your people, but they could revolt, and all the different permutations that you could possibly come up with for the different possible rules for a game like Risk.
Uh-huh.
And then I went on and created my own role-playing games, all these different role-playing games in different genres, like a Western role-playing game, different fantasy ones, and, combining, Dungeons and Dragons, RuneQuest, Arduin, Traveler, all these other games out there.
Wow. So you were really drawn to inventing these characters and these stories and these worlds. I mean, that's been implanted, it sounds like, from just the very beginning.
Yes. And then I would also, of course, write short stories, create movies. So I was always trying to create something. Mm-hmm. And I think my path into being an entrepreneur was just a natural extension of that. It's just using technology to create new things. And some of them happen to be businesses. When you were a little kid, how were you sort of conceptualizing when you thought about your future? How are you thinking about where this might end up going? Because we were both pre-internet, at least as little kids and stuff. So where were you? Yeah. What were you thinking might be a path when you first started to think about that? One path, you don't know when you're young. And I dreamed of doing everything. I dreamed of being an architect. I thought at one point I might be a painter, because my mom was a painter and a sculptor. I thought at another point I would make computer games because I had an Apple computer, an Apple II, and I was obsessed with computer games. I had all the different, and I had an Atari and all these things. It was amazing. So I thought, maybe that's the path I'll go down. And actually it was. I ended up making a lot of games throughout my career. That's what got me into starting companies, was actually the games I made. It wasn't starting the company. The company was a vehicle for the games I was creating. So that led me to be an entrepreneur. So you never know where life will take you. And then I got into movies and I thought, I'm going to be a filmmaker. But my father, he was an MIT trained rocket scientist. Wow. And he said, son, if you go into film, you will be unemployed. Nobody gets a good job in the movies. People just dream about doing that. He goes, if you want to have a good future, study computers. Well, from the title, I knew he was a smart man, and from the advice he did, that's verified. Yeah, he was right. And so I took his advice. I went into electrical computer engineering. I thought, maybe I'll create games when I get out of college. But then once I graduated, I decided I just have to do this film thing. I just have to see it through. So I applied to graduate school at USC and ended up getting my master's there in USC Cinema Television School.
Fantastic. What was your emphasis at SC?
I was interested in creating, believe it or not, crazy experimental films. So I wanted to like push the limits. I was into all these directors at the time. Like I loved David Lynch.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I loved Coppola. I loved Truffaut. I loved Fellini.
Wow.
And I liked very like Buñuel doing.
I was going to get to that. Who is Buñuel's pretty out there. What's sort of maybe the most esoteric filmmaker who you're like quietly a fan of?
I think there's too many to list.
Okay.
Now, I'm a big fan of film, and I like anybody who's trying something new, who's kind of stretching the imagination and challenging the audience to think. So I would just watch them all, Godard and all the different movies, trying to learn from them all. And I was making my own experimental films, like Breakfast on Another Planet was one of my films. It was a crazy movie. You have to watch it to understand it, if you can understand it. And then I graduated film school. And like all good film students who graduate, I didn't have a job.
Sure.
Just like my father said.
Right.
I had no job. I was in Hollywood. I was just a graduate. So what do you do when you don't have a job? I decided I got a list of there's directories of the different executives in Hollywood and all the famous producers. And I just went through the list and I wrote personal letters to 150 of the top executives in Hollywood.
Okay.
And then I waited. And do you know what happened?
I'm hoping that there's one magic person that wrote you back and set you, or you heard from nothing. You heard from no one.
Out of 150, I got 3 responses.
Okay, that's about the math I would expect, actually.
Yes, so very small because it's Hollywood. Everybody writes to people. They don't care.
Sure.
Well, I wrote a very short, very funny letter making fun of myself. And the first person who responded was the producer of Star Wars.
Really? Wow.
Yes. Called me personally and said, I loved your letter. I go, great. And he goes, but I don't have a job for you. I just wanted to talk to you. So we talked.
Cool. Very cool.
Yes. So we had I was kind of nervous. I didn't know what to say, but we had a conversation. And he was very nice, and that was it. The second response I got was from Disney, the Walt Disney Company. They called me into their film division, and I met with the head of production there.
Wow.
And head of production said, so you want a job with us? And it was going great. We were talking. The interview was going really well. I was very excited. And then one question came up. Okay. The head of production asked me, so Steve, what movies do you like? And then I started to list off, all the films that I like.
What you just went through, Buñuel, Godard.
Yeah, all these crazy films, even more than that, Clockwork Orange and all these other ones. And the person was just sitting there staring at me. And then the person says, are there any Disney films that you like? And I start to think, and I go, when I was a kid, I used to love Disney films.
Uh-huh. Whoops.
That was the end of the interview.
So, yeah, do you guys validate? Yeah.
It was over. I saw the facial expression just go from happy to I want you out of my office right now.
Wow.
So, they say honesty pays.
Sure.
Well,
not
in a office.
Right. I love that.
Too honest.
I love that.
So it was over. I didn't get the job. I wasn't the right person for Disney.
Right.
So I was waiting, and finally, one last person responded. And his name was Chuck Freeze.
Yeah.
And Chuck Freeze was a famous he's a famous basically television producer. Had produced over 150 TV movies, ranging all the way back. One of his early films was The Martian Chronicles. I don't know if you remember that, but he did many of these miniseries and TV movies.
I totally know his name. Yeah.
Yeah, he had an office on Hollywood Boulevard that overlooked the Man Chinese Theater, literally.
Oh, okay.
Almost across the street from the Man Chinese Theater.
That's facing my apartment. I moved from the Hollywood Hills. That was basically that was looking toward my place.
That's why you know him, because his name was in huge letters. Fries Entertainment, spelled like fries.
Wow.
Fries. Huge letters on the top of this building, the biggest building in the neighborhood. And so I go there, and I'm so excited. I might have a job, and I'm going to be positive. I'm not going to say anything negative in this interview.
And you looked up his work at this point.
I love your films. I love them. I've watched them all. No,
my favorite Disney film. Let me tell you about that.
I didn't have to say I've watched every one of his TV movies. And the problem was I really didn't watch TV.
Sure.
So,
and you couldn't back then. We didn't have the access. I mean, they weren't archived the way.
Yeah, you couldn't watch his old movies.
Right.
So I went in there. We started talking, and it went really well. The interview. I didn't blow it. I didn't say anything that blew it. And then he gave me a job as what's called a reader.
Right.
And for those of you who don't know, a reader is kind of the lowest job on the totem pole. And that's where you are given a script, and you are supposed to read through the script and then synopsize it as concisely as possible and tell the producers in the company and the executives whether it's good or bad. Sure. Whether it's worth their time to read.
And using all of your experience, you're the newest person, you're the greenest, you're the most fluorescent green person in the entertainment industry at the moment you're hired, but your advice determines whether this project goes past you or not.
And surprisingly, that's how Hollywood works.
Pretty much.
The newest, the lowest people on the totem pole are the ones who pick which scripts go anywhere. Of course, if the script has a major star attached, then you can jump.
Right.
You can jump the people like me, the screeners. So the job pays terribly. It doesn't pay well because it takes a long time to read a script and write up a synopsis. You only get, a pittance for doing it.
Right.
But it's where it was a job. So I took it, and I had no job. And I'm working there, a few weeks. I'm getting the hang of it, and I'm also getting bored because most of these screenplays are god awful. Like there's a reason people don't read them because they are.
Yeah, there's a reason that readers all over Hollywood right now, there are thousands of people with that job for that very reason. Because what I always tell people, everyone can type, so everyone mistakenly thinks they can write.
Yes, and most of these screenplays, unfortunately, aren't worth the paper they're printed on. So you sit there, you're reading all the time, trying to go as fast as you can to make it barely enough to feed yourself, usually not enough to cover rent. And I'm doing this for a few weeks, and after a few weeks, I'm like, wow, I had a scholarship for writing. I have 2 degrees. I want to, I really want to be a writer.
Right.
So I go and I bug the head of the company again because he was the one who interviewed me. And I said, I requested a meeting. And then he's a really funny guy. Okay. Have you ever seen the movie Barton Fink?
Oh, sure.
You know the producer in Barton Fink?
Yeah.
The big guy, kind of Hollywood producer type.
Yeah.
He talked like this, and he looked exactly the guy in Barton Fink. And he was like, Hoffman, I gave you a job. What are you coming back to me for? And I was like, well, I want to be a writer, Chuck. Make me a writer. He goes, Hoffman, it's only been a few weeks. You're bugging me after only a few weeks? Chuck, I can do more. Go away, Hoffman. Go away and don't bother me. So that was our meeting.
Okay.
I go back to reading. A week later, I get a call, and it is from his son, Butch. Now, in Hollywood, nepotism runs wild, right?
Oh,
everybody is hiring their relatives because, you can't get a good job if your relative doesn't give you one, especially if your relative's famous like Chuck Fries was.
It is not
powerful. Right. So son Butch is working for his dad, only his son Butch is like in his 40s, and he's a bitter man. Because he wanted to make it in Hollywood on his own. He wanted to do it on his own. And now he's working for his dad at like 40, and he is pissed.
I know the type. That is a whole type in Hollywood.
everybody, even in my short time and in going in and out of that office for a month, I feared the man because he always had a scowl on his face. And now I've been assigned to work with him.
Wow.
And so this wasn't my first pick, but hey, it was a sort of promotion. I was still a reader, but I was also going to do some research for Butch.
Oh, okay.
So Butch looks at me with like looking right through me, not a very friendly.
Not at you and
no smile, and tells me he is doing a mini series on the Oregon Trail and wants me to research this guy Francis Parkman. So, yeah, Butch, I'll do a good job. So I go off and I basically do a ton of research and I write up a treatment, which is the outline for a script, or in this case, a mini series. And I spend a lot of time on it while I'm doing the reading. I put all my energy into it, try to do a really good job, give it back to him, and wait. And then he calls me back in his office and he goes, "This is great. You did a great job." And he's actually smiling at me.
Oh, nice.
So the light bulb goes off in my head. And as soon as I hear that, I say to Chuck, the head of the company, I want to meet him again. So Chuck, a week later, Chuck schedules another meeting with me. And he's like, "Hoffman, what are you doing? You're back in my office?" I'm like, "I did a great job. Butch really loved the work I did. You see, I can write. I want to be a writer." "Hoffman, I just gave you a promotion. You've only been on the job a couple months. What do you want? Go away." So I go away. And I'm working away. In a week or so later, I go into my office to pick up my scripts from the director of development who worked under Chuck. And the director of development looks at me and she looks so pissed off, so upset. And she points a finger right in my face and says, "You got me fired." And then storms out of the office.
What?
Yeah. I was like,
kidding.
"What are you talking about? Yeah. Me got you? What are you talking about?" So I'm standing there in her office. She's gone. I don't know what's going on. And then Chuck's secretary comes in and says, Chuck wants to see you. I was like, "Oh, I guess I'll find out what's going on." So I go into Chuck's office, sit down with him. Like I'm kind of, you don't know what happened.
Sure.
Chuck looks at me and goes, "Hoffman, you know what? You're our new head of development."
Oh, man. Wow.
I was like,
What
are you talking about?
That's also how Hollywood works.
Yeah, it is.
A couple months later, here's
swimming
more
with
responsibility
sharks, right?
than you can imagine. Yeah.
You've seen the movie Swimming with Sharks.
Oh, sure. I know it well.
Yeah, it was like I was living that. Like
that's crazy.
And this is just out of film school, a few months out of film school. So I go back into the office kind of dumbstruck because first of all, I wanted to be a writer. Secondly, and more importantly, I had no idea what a director of development does. What all I knew is that she handed me scripts to read. Right. That's all I knew of her job. So now I'm in her office and I go to the window and look out the window and I'm looking down at the Man Chinese Theater and the stars on Hollywood Boulevard below. And I'm thinking, this is freaking bizarre because I am a development executive and I don't know what it does because in film school, they never taught us this stuff.
Well,
it was like,
and now with all your knowledge, you could take consolation in the fact that that's what a lot of them, that's the inner conversation that a lot of those people have when they first get the job, I think, because they just really don't understand,
Nobody knows. And so then the phone starts ringing and I don't know if I should pick it up because it doesn't feel like it's my office. But there's nobody else there and it just keeps ringing and ringing. And Chuck told me to go and work in our office, so I can't really leave.
Right, that's your office now.
Yeah, so I pick up the phone and they ask, "Is Karen here?" And I'm like, "Well, she's not here right now, but I can help you." And then it's one of the big agencies, ICM, and they're like, "Can we send over this script to you?" And they start describing the script, and I'm like, "Sure, send it over," because I don't know what to say. So I just tell them to send it over. Basically, I said that to everybody who called me for anything. Send it over. And then I go back to my desk, and all of a sudden, the other readers start to come in. And some of them have been working for this Freeze Entertainment for years and years and years. Okay. It's been a long time. And I only started, just recently. And they look at me and they're like, what are you doing behind Karen's desk? Yeah. And I'm like, well, she doesn't work here anymore. Wow. And I have to explain. It's so awkward.
That's totally awkward, yeah.
As you can imagine. Yeah. I work here. And they're like, oh, okay. Well, can I have my script? And I look at them and I say, and they go, the scripts are over there. You can go get them over there.
Assign us work.
They know more about her job than I know. Yeah, so I'm handing them scripts. And, that part is pretty easy. Sure. I figured that out.
Right.
I still don't really know what a development executive does besides say, answer the phone and say, send us scripts.
And here you go. Tell me what you think. Yeah.
But, the next day I get called into Chuck's office. And then Chuck is sitting there and his other son. Of course, he hired his other son, too.
Oh, perfect. Nice.
Yeah, they're sitting there and they're, and Chuck's looking at me and they're talking. They're talking about this new film they're producing and who should star in this TV movie that they're making. And they're going back and forth and back and forth. And they're dropping all these names. Now, the real problem with me getting this particular job was that when I said I don't watch television, I meant
any of these people.
I don't watch any I just watch these art films.
Right.
I didn't watch any television since, when I was a kid I did, but then I got into sports and creating my own stuff. I just never had time for it. It was not not on my priority list. So I didn't watch any TV. So I had no idea who they're talking about or what's going on. And then they look at me and Chuck looks at me and goes, Hoffman, who do you think we should have star in this?
Oh, wow.
And then I'm like, what do you say? Like, I have no clue.
And people who don't know, I mean, especially the MOW is kind of a lost art form, but it was typically not actors you would know, even if you knew movies. They tend to be actors who had never been in movies or they're
B-list actors.
Yeah, so you really have to know that world specifically to be useful.
Yeah, and these, and they're banding about these names. They're not like the big, Tom Cruise, whoever, the ones everybody knows. They're the B and C list.
Yeah, you can afford those A-list
So I don't even know who they are to suggest some random people, let alone one who's exactly right for this part. And so I'm looking at Chuck and I'm panicking. I'm going, okay, my boss, who seemed very capable, got fired for basically no reason because Chuck liked me. And now I'm so much less qualified. I'm about to be fired, I'm sure. Yeah. But I look at him and I said, Chuck, let me think about this and get back to you.
That's a great answer.
So all I could say. And so you okay, Hoffman, get back to me. And so I go after that meeting, I go to my office and I'm starting to think, well, what do I do?
Yeah.
Now, you couldn't just Google this at the time because they didn't have the internet.
Right.
So there was no Googling this. And so I remembered that my brother's best friend had just moved to Hollywood, and he was a young guy who wanted to make movies, but his special talent was he was an encyclopedia of everything Hollywood. He was a living encyclopedia. And I call him up, and he knows every B-list actor, C-list actress, D, E, F, ones you've never heard of that were in a cameo once in some bizarre TV show. He'll actually know these people. And so I described to him the part as best I can. And he says, Steve, well, I think this actress would be your first choice, and this actress would be your second choice. And if she's not available, go for this actress. So I write it all down. The next day I go into Chuck's office. Chuck looks at me and goes, Hoffman, have you thought about it? I said, yes, Chuck, I actually did. And I think this actress would be the best first choice. This would be a great second choice. And if she's not available, we should go for her. And Chuck looks at me. Hoffman, you're brilliant.
That's great. So you had your own personal Cyrano to whisper in your ear.
And so I'm in this job and, basically bullshitting my way through it, trying to figure out what we do, how the whole Hollywood works, how you pick actors and actresses. I start reading Variety and the Hollywood Reporter and all this stuff. And every single day, I'm sure, will be my last day. But somehow I don't I managed not to be fired.
You know this guy's number by heart, probably, that you're calling with throw me some casting ideas.
Yeah. He's amazing. He runs an independent film company now. He's done very well.
Nice.
And so so it goes on and on and on for a year. And I'm okay. I start to feel almost secure in my job. And as soon as I start to feel comfortable in my job, once I'm not just terrified of being discovered as faking it.
Sure.
Once I actually feel like I have some command, then I get bored and restless, which is my tendency.
Okay.
And I decide, my dream was to make art films, and I am kind of making crappy TV movies.
Right. Sure.
And I'm not even making them. I'm not even writing them. I'm just like managing the whole development process, putting all the pieces together, pitching them to the networks, doing all these things, but I'm not actually being the creative person I had dreamed of. So after a year, I decide, you know what? I have to do something different with my life. And at that moment, I bump into one of the producers in the company. His cousin turns out to be the founder of Sega, the computer game company.
Sure.
And Sega had just passed up Nintendo at that point in history. And they were the biggest game company, on the planet, biggest video game company. And he says, you know what, Steve? I know you love games. Do you want to meet my cousin? He's the chairman and founder of Sega. He's an American.
Wow.
And I was like, no way.
That's crazy.
I always wanted to make games because I told you I wanted to make games. I was like, yeah, introduce me. So he introduces me. I go meet him. He looks and we start talking about ideas, game ideas and Hollywood and all this stuff. And he goes, we wanted to send a Hollywood creative person to Japan to make games out of our headquarters.
Wow.
Now I couldn't refuse. I was like, oh my God, this is going to be, I actually get to be creative. This is going to be amazing. So I go back to Chuck and I hand in my resignation. And Chuck calls me into his office, of course. And he goes, he's visibly upset.
Sure.
And he goes, Hoffman, what's going on? I gave you the job of a lifetime.
Oh.
What are you doing walking out on me?
If your last name is Freeze, it is the job of a lifetime.
Yeah, and I was like, but Chuck, I have this chance to make games in Japan. He's going, what? We're going to make games? What the hell? And then he starts to think. He's like, well, this kid is going to make games. What do I do? And what he comes up with was, Hoffman, do you have a brother? And I was like, actually, I do.
Yeah.
And he's here in Hollywood. Do you want to hire him? And he goes, absolutely, another Hoffman.
I see. I love how this guy thinks. Just keep it in the family. It's not. I like that it's not just his family that he'll let you be nepotistic with your family.
I know. So my brother is like, he has a part-time job in a record store. He's going nowhere. He dreams of being a music producer, but it will never happen. So I call him up and says, "Hey, I just got you a job as a TV development executive."
Wow! And so he comes in having not even been a reader.
Right.
That's so perfect.
Because he's a Hoffman and he wanted another Hoffman.
Oh man.
So I'm off to Japan. My brother's in my job, and that's the end of chapter 1 of my Hollywood experience.
That is awesome. That is so cool. I'm glad you told me all that. That
might be enough for your whole podcast. I think I used up a lot of time there.
Well, I'm good. If you have time, well, I'd like to get to a few more things. But are you okay on time?
Sure.
Okay, great. Well, no, that's fantastic. How long were you in Japan?
Oh, I stayed another year in Japan, and then I got the itch to move on again, and I came back to Silicon Valley and started my own game company.
And this is where you seg into really phase 2 of Steve Hoffman, becoming Captain Hoff, I think. So, what was sort of your what was your entree to Silicon Valley, and then what was sort of the first thing that really was visible enough to really start to get you the I was going to say notoriety. Notoriety is used as a bad word. But where did you go from there in terms of Silicon Valley?
Well, I'll skip over a few years now because there's I can't go into excruciating detail like I did before. But, I started my own game company. Our first game was a big success. Went out there, got distributed by a company called Microprose Spectrum Holobyte, which was, they make the game Civilization. And at the time, they were the largest PC game publisher. So it was I really lucked out. And so we got this massive distribution on a game that basically I made with my own money.
Oh, okay. So that really was a big win for you.
It was a big win because it was a super low budget game.
Yeah.
We just managed, but it was really addictive. It was a game called Gazillionaire. So we made that, and then that was successful. Then I went on and did an internet company. Where I actually went out and raised venture capital, whole nother crazy experience.
Sure.
And it was called Spider Dance. And I just kept going, doing company after company, always kind of combining creative media, games and entertainment with technology.
Right.
So it was really the perfect thing for me because I had that technical background and kind of the creative storytelling, gaming, movie background. And I just kept doing that over and over and over. And after I'd done my third venture-funded startup, I decided it was time to take a break, and I wanted to experience what it was like to help out other entrepreneurs. So I would go to my friends who were all starting companies, and we'd go out to coffee, and I'd give them advice and connect them with investors and, review their business plans and tell them how I had raised money and, solved some of the problems that they had. And once this started, they began coming to me with lots of questions.
Right.
And those questions, they were very similar. All the entrepreneurs have very similar questions. So I started a blog, and I named the blog Founders Space.
Okay.
And in the blog, I'd post the questions and then the answers I would write up. And I figured, this will save me time. Instead of going out to coffee, I can just point to my blog.
Sure.
They can read the answer. And then the blog got popular and other founders started to come to me who I didn't know, who weren't my friends. And so I started to hold bi-monthly what we called Founder Space roundtables, where we'd all get around a big table and we'd discuss their businesses. I'd invite investors and lawyers and marketing people to help them out. And that was kind of the beginning of our incubation process. And that evolved eventually into our full-fledged incubator and accelerator here in San Francisco, Founder Space. And then we started to kind of get on the map. People from all over the world started to hear about what we were doing. Tour groups started to come in, a lot from China, as you know. It was just at the time when China was kind of discovering Silicon Valley in a big way. And people started to invite me to China. They were like, come to China. And I was like, okay, I've never been to China. Free trip to China.
Sure. Sign me up.
So I went to China. I went the first time. It was just really fun. I thought, that's the end of China for me. I'll just go back to Silicon Valley. But I kept getting invited. And then on my third trip, I thought, there's something here in China. It was just the time when the government was focusing all the energy, everybody was jumping into startups, a very, very, very exciting time. And I said, I could bring Founder Space to China. And after that, after I kind of made that mental commitment and put some effort into it, things just took off. I mean, they took off like crazy because the timing was right. I got in at the right time of China, when it was really in that expansion mode in the tech space. I also had my book published, Make Elephants Fly, that went in China, became a very successful hit in China. And then I started talking because I love not just talking, but I love teaching. I love teaching and explaining to entrepreneurs, storytelling, all the problems we had and all the craziness of life and everything else. So I started giving these talks, and it all came together as one thing. So our incubator, my book, and my talks just kind of propelled it. And before I knew it, Founder Space had become very well known across China.
Absolutely, and that's how I first met you. You were speaking TechNode and Startup Grind hosted a place over at a co-working space. My now friend John Artman, I didn't know him at the time, moderated this, and it was before your book came out. It was done, but the publication had not happened, and I don't think you had any. I know you were there and in talks, but I seem to recall that I don't think there were any Founder Space incubators open here yet. I think the first things were on the boards for you, but I don't think they had broken ground or moved in, as I recall.
Yeah.
What was kind of the timeline? Because from that time of meeting you to now, it seems like, I mean, again, as you said, the growth has been massive, and I want to talk about that in just a few moments. But when did you first publish the blog? What was really that early Founder Space community days? Like how far back are we talking? When did Founder Space really, when did the blog first surface?
Well, we're talking, I first began the concept of Founder Space in 2011.
Wow.
So it was a while, but it was
Sure.
gradual.
Sure.
So I didn't commit full time. I was doing it part time, really just to help out friends while I was doing a bunch of other projects.
Mm-hmm.
And then about 4.5 years ago, that's when I really committed full time to growing it, because at that point it had just taken over my life. It had become, it had organically grown into a full-time thing. And then about 3.5 years ago was the first time I set foot in China.
How about that? Because I met you, I mean, close to 3 years ago. I would say that was that was a shade under 3 years. So how big? Give us some sense of scale now. How big is Founder Space here in China these days?
Well, it's hard for me to know.
Yeah. Well, right. In terms of what you know, which is China people will understand that.
Yeah.
It's hard to really know, although you founded it. But
so, our main goal has been to educate.
Mm-hmm.
So if we do one, I figure there's so many incubators in China that whether we open an incubator or we work with an established incubator or accelerator in China, it doesn't really matter. The one thing we're delivering that's special is kind of our unique approach to problem solving, like how we approach problems in Silicon Valley, how we think, how we view the world, all of that, our mindset, all of that, on top of what Chinese are already getting from the existing kind of infrastructure and system out there. Mm-hmm. So, for example, I was just in China a few weeks ago, and my trips are always crazy. I just go, it's like a mad rush.
And that's why we're doing this on Skype. Actually seeing you in China is impossible because we're not in business, but we can get on Skype if you're at home, which is good.
It's always crazy, and I always apologize to my friends out there. I'm like, I'm so sorry. I was just in the town a few days, and then I'm in the next town, and the next town. So we went into Beijing, and we ran a startup program with our partners, who is a professor at Tsinghua University. Mm-hmm. So we had 24 startups, and we took them through what we tend to do a really intensive program. So we did a 3-day program that was super intensive with these startups and at the end, they pitched to investors. And that's always a great experience because I get to, for 3 days, I'm working with, 24 startups, nonstop into the night. Mm-hmm. And then we did another program in Shenzhen and another program in Shanghai. So we ran 3 programs on my one quick trip there. Also, we went to our incubator in Xi'an and did a whole bunch of stuff, a lot of work with the different universities around Xi'an, getting the students into doing startups. And then I also flew into HOFF, where we are working with the government to set up a new Founder Space, and we'll see if that goes through. You never know until the deal is signed. Mm-hmm. And then I also closed a deal, which is closed, and so it will definitely open in Guangdong province. So Dongguan province, right? Okay. Guangdong City. I get them mixed up.
Yeah. No, I understand. I know Guangdong
province and one of the cities. Yeah. So we're opening a Founder Space there, which very excited about. And then I also went to Jiaxing and met with, all the people, the mayor, the vice mayor, the party secretary, all the people, and discussed opening a Founder Space there. And that kind of encapsulates a typical trip to China for me.
That's
a few weeks
so
of mad
Yeah.
And I spoke at several conferences.
Sure.
Also.
It is really kind of mind blowing, and I'm not saying this to to butter your biscuit, but it's so funny because you are so well known here, and I mean, quite literally have spoken in person or via teleconference to millions of people now in China. So you had this best-selling business book for such a long time. How do you suggest outsiders? We'll switch to Little China focus as we wrap it up here for the sake of time. How do you suggest, you've got so much good advice now from having done this yourself. How do you suggest that people who are trying to deal with China from the outside, approach China? And because there's going to be a lot of challenges and adversity in this process, but how do you sort of condition people who are ready to do something, but they need that good advice to be able to make the first step without falling off the cliff?
I would tell them to do it in small bites.
Mm-hmm.
Don't take off a big bite. As they say, don't take off more than you can chew.
Right.
Because in China, especially, it's such a different culture. It's such a different system. How relationships work is totally different than in Western countries. It's relationship driven culture where that's the most important thing. So what I did when I went into China is a lot of people came up to me because they had heard of Founderspace and said, let's do a deal for all of China for Founderspace.
Right.
I knew, who are these people? Like, can I trust them? I don't really know them that well.
Yeah.
So I would always narrow it down to, I said, let's do a small project first, or let's just do something for a limited period of time in this one city where we'd get to know each other, and start to build a relationship. And instead of doing one big project with one partner,
and embedding the farm, basically.
Betting the farm that works out, and at the same time knowing very little about China in the beginning, I decided to do a lot of small, low-risk projects. So literally dozens of small, little projects that are low risk. They're short time frame, limited amount of capital, money risk, in a certain geographic area. So if it didn't work out, well, that city didn't work out for a while, but I have all these other cities in China.
Right. It's contained. It's kind of geo-fenced, and it's not a career ender if it doesn't work, etc.
Right. And that worked really well.
Yeah. That's really good advice.
You can't do this for all businesses, but I think you can probably figure out a way to do it for most businesses. Like, don't just take one distributor for all of China. Instead, work with a lot of distributors, right? You don't know which ones are going to rip you off, which ones are going to do an incredible job, and, who you can really trust in the long term and who's good for the short term.
Sure.
So all of these things. So I just and then I focused on, business development. If you're the CEO, you can't dabble in China. You have to go all in or not in. So in a way, China's consumed me. It's gobbled me up because it's such a big country.
It is. And they really want to deal. Going back to how China and the U.S. opened up. I've been doing some research for a project I'm working on actually about Mao Nixon, and there was the famous thing of when it worked is finally it was Nixon talking to the president of the Philippines, talking to Chairman Mao, and it was, from a head, through a head, to a head. They want to deal with the CEO on things that you might otherwise delegate to someone else. But they're dealing with you ultimately. Everyone you're in business is in business with Captain Hoff more than Founderspace.
It's all about the relationship, and they want the relationship with the ultimate decision maker.
And that's the critical thing people have to understand about China. I think it's different from other places.
Yeah. So if you send a junior person out to China
it's like an insult.
To do the work, it's an insult, and nothing's going to happen.
Yeah.
They're just going to say you're not serious. We're not going to do business with you. So I learned a tremendous amount, not just about doing business in China, but also about the culture and the people. And, learn to, I really love it. I mean, it's been an amazing, for me, bottom line, it was worth coming to China just for the experience. Not to mention business has turned out great, but even if it hadn't, I would have been very happy. was what I did.
What's something that you're working on that you want to be better at, just in terms of overall business or life? What's something, because you've accomplished so much and have such eclectic interests, but what's something that you're working on to improve, whether it's a skill or a philosophy or an outlook or a business move that you could talk about?
So what I would like to do is, in the future, I would like to use the relationships I have, some of the capabilities I have, and my ability to communicate ideas to really push forward not just my own business, but ideas that I think are very socially important, things that really matter in society, things that could really help people, and also help champion other people out there doing great work. Entrepreneurs who are social entrepreneurs who are doing a really good work and are really passionate about what they do, people running nonprofits. I want to put more and more time into that, and less time into just building our business.
Last question. What is one idea that you'd like to leave us with today?
So
Stumper.
No, so I'll give you an idea that I ask myself.
Okay.
Are you putting your time into the most important things? The idea is, ask yourself this question, and don't ask it once. Ask it over and over again until you can guide yourself. We aren't all capable of doing everything we imagine, right? We all have our limitations. We have our limitations because of our person, because of the situation we're in, because of a million factors, right? That will limit us. But given who you are and where you are in your life, what's the most value you can be creating for the people around you and the world around you? And can you focus your energies on that instead of getting distracted into all these other things?
That sounds like the secret to everything. Captain Hoff,
yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
All right, that's the show this week. You can visit crazyinagoodway.com to find the blog post for this episode, to learn about my other podcasts or what else I'm up to, or just to use the contact form to say hi. Don't forget to please share, rate, and subscribe to the show if you like it. I really appreciate it, and that means the world to me. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next week.